Hi, my name's Steve Wraith, and this is NUFC Matters. And at the moment, I've only got Steve Hastie with us. We've got no idea whether Geordie Dentist is. I'm sure he'll join us at some point. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm fine, Stephen. Yourself?
Yeah, very good. We've obviously gone to a pre-record today because Neil's got a family drop-off at the airport later on, and he couldn't do a live. And so we've put out a cry for questions, and of course, on Twitter, we have been inundated, Steve. So I'm going to start with Chris Cooper's. He was first in, so it's only right that we'll give him the first dabs. And it was, hi, Steve. My question is, do you think it's right that people are directly or indirectly losing their jobs because of this huge delay in the takeover saga? And do you think the Premier League care and are aware that it's happening? Thanks, mate. He's obviously referring to the news that's broken today about 50% of the catering staff and leisure staff at the football club looks as if they're going to lose their jobs, Steve. So do you think that the Premier League are particularly bothered about that? And do you think it would speed up the process?
Perfectly honest, I very much doubt they are. I very much doubt it. The whole redundancy aspect of what goes on at St James's Park, you have to go back to the fact that Ashley sold those rights to the catering and the safety and security, etc., many years ago. So basically, Sodexo have a contract, and Sodexo have people that they have embedded up there who do the work. Some of them are part-time, as in they work on match days and match days only, but they do have a core of staff who work sort of 7 days a week or 6 days a week at St James's Park, and also in the training ground. By the way, they provide the catering for the players and the coaching staff and all the ancillaries that go on up there. So in that respect, you can understand perhaps that it's out of Newcastle United's hands in what one of their contractors does. On the other aspect, of course, is the very fact that as a big part of the northeast, and that Newcastle United is exactly that in terms of the city centre, and you want to put a message out that you're supporting your population, you're supporting your fan base, you're supporting the wider community. You'd think that Newcastle United would have looked and spoken to Sodexo and said, look, we'd rather you didn't do this. We can work on this over a period of time. Let's keep those people employed. They've got stuff that they need to be doing, etc., etc. So from that aspect, I find that very, very disappointing that we're hearing that obviously conversations like that have not been going on or haven't been fruitful enough to keep those people in jobs.
Yeah, Albert Mooney says, lads, I can't see any negatives with this deal. Massive investment in the country and the regeneration of a city and a football club so long neglected. Massive thank you to you and the lads for keeping the positivity. These shows have been a godsend and not a hairy hand in sight. Thank you, Albert. Terence Ross says, the negatives are the press and the lines of keys in various reporters. Yes, I think you're very, very right on that score. Scott Biver Carlin says, next question, Steve, what effect do you think it will have on the club if the takeover fails? We've covered this a little bit in the past. For me, I just feel it would be, the beginning of the end of our football club. And I think when you look at, what is happening down the road at Sunderland with their what they're having to go through at the moment, various fans meetings, and with Stuart Donald being well publicised over the last 24 hours, that's where Newcastle United's future could lie. What's your thoughts, Steve?
I'm in exactly the same mindset at the moment, Steve. I look down the road and I see the shambles that's occurred there over the last 2 years, and I see that what's happening with Donald, the statements that he's coming out with, and I'm thinking, God, I hope we're not going to be in exactly the same sort of situation, either with Mike Ashley remaining but absolutely pushing us down the lane, if you like, and having nothing else to do with the football club, or alternatively selling it to someone who is of the ilk of a Donald and a Mifflin, who come in and basically fleece the football club. That's those are the two concerns that I have. It gets sold to the wrong person, or he just doesn't do anything with it and kicks us out. I remain positive, naturally. Well, not naturally, obviously, because I've been so positive all the way through, and I can't see the negatives from a footballing perspective and from a regional perspective of having Newcastle United owned by someone other than Mike Ashley. That other bit being, obviously, of course, with the proviso and those little caveats that I've just put in earlier about the wrong person buying it, or Ashley, because the takeover doesn't happen, kicking us down the back lane again.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, those of you who are living in the Gateshead area will know one of our guests very well. A big welcome to NUFC Matters to Ian Mearns, the MP. How are you, mate?
I'm all right, Stephen, and I took that two Steves. So hello, both of you. You all right? And I'm all right, mate. You know, surviving in the current daft situation. You know, but there you go. And working from home mainly, so I'm making regular appearances on Parliament TV from the kitchen in Bensham, you know. So there you go.
Yeah, it's been a crazy time, Ian, and we invited you on because I did notice this morning that obviously with the next set of MPs supposedly trying to block the deal, I thought it would be good to get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and hear just, you know, from an MP, because you know, especially an MP who's supported Newcastle, you know, as long as we have, and it's you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? This takeover, first of all, Ian, is dragged on, and I mean, you couldn't do a takeover simply at Newcastle United, but for it to happen during the lockdown period, during, you know, this country's first major pandemic for over 100 years, it couldn't have been any worse, could it really?
No, it's been disastrous. But I have to say, I think the Premier League's prevarication on this has been completely unforgivable. If they were going to kill the deal off, they should have done it. If they're going to allow the deal, they should have done it. They've had more than enough time to make a decision one way or another. And frankly, I think now that Mike Ashley, even, you know, not that I'm one to give Mike Ashley any advice, but if I was Mike Ashley, I'd be inquiring with the Premier League now whether they're now guilty of restraint of trade as far as he's concerned, because he's got an asset which he wants to realise at £300 million. And also with the Premier League transfer window coming up, we've got a situation where the club could be disadvantaged from the outset by the Premier League that it's playing in by not being able to, you know, have a transfer selling and buying strategy which is agreeable to whoever might own the club. And I mean, whoever might own the club, it might be Mike Ashley. But the thing is, Mike Ashley is in a situation where he's in limbo, the club's in limbo, the transfer strategy's in limbo, and it's, I'm afraid to say, due to the prevarication of the Premier League, which has just taken far too long.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been, you know, it's been well documented that there's various MPs are, you know, getting together and against it. It adds the question, doesn't it? We're in the middle of not an NUFC takeover here. We're in the middle of geopolitics, aren't we? It's a geopolitical problem.
Well, the thing is, Steve, I mean, from the political perspective, I am really not concerned at the moment about the activities of a handful of MPs, whether there be an all-party parliamentary group or whether there be a select committee. Those groups in Parliament don't make decisions. It is the executive that make the decisions, and Oliver Dowden, the DCMS, has been quite clear that the government are not going to get involved in this. It's up to the Premier League. And frankly, you know, it seems to me, and it's mainly, it's a funny combination, but the ones I've seen recently have been mainly Conservative politicians. And, you know, they're quite happy. And in fact, are probably delighted that the government have just managed to secure the restarting of selling of arms to Saudi Arabia. But heaven forfend the Saudi Arabians should own a football club in the northeast of England. Complete nonsense and hypocrisy of the highest order, I'm afraid, as well.
Do you think there's a bit of north-south divide, Ian? It's something which I've certainly thought of.
I think they're all closet Man U fans, Steve.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's definitely, it feels like that though, doesn't it? Even the way that some of the press, I mean, you know, I know you're very active on Twitter. Miguel Delaney certainly had a field day with Newcastle fans over the last 15 weeks. Richard Keys, of course, you know, stirring the pot.
I know what I'd like to do with Richard. Sorry, I shouldn't say. Yeah.
But yeah, you know what I mean. It's it does very much feel like there's a north-south divide, and it's everything. God forbid you know.
I think there's an element of that, Steve. But I actually think, right, this is a few MPs who find that they've got a chance of actually making a name for themselves in the sports press and therefore getting a bit of profile elevation. And that's what it's about. I mean, it's all about massaging egos from that perspective, you know, and you know, I got any names of people who've been involved recently in stirring this up again? I must admit, when I see that sort of stuff going on, I tend to ignore it because, from my perspective, it isn't that important in the wider political system. But of course, to Newcastle fans, it looks important because it involves the club that they love, you know.
Yeah,
I think one of the interesting names that came out was the gentleman who's a SNP MP up in Scotland.
Angus.
Yeah, former BBC reporter. He had an awful lot to say at the parliamentary committee, didn't he? A couple of weeks ago. And then he reared his head up again yesterday, and he's added his name to a list of 11 or 12 MPs. And this is the same sort of MP who is sitting there wanting to split the country, split the UK, give independence to Scotland, and then have an involvement in the EFL, in the English Football League, and the English Premier League. Maybe if he looked at what was going on in Scotland in the Scottish Premier League, he might have a little bit more respect for him. Put it that way.
Well, look. I mean, I know Angus relatively well, and I must admit I don't know where he's coming from on this. He is the chair of a select committee, but it's a select committee really which has got nothing to do with this whole process. And from that perspective, I really don't know what his interest is. I mean, you got to remember, you know, it's a bit sad for Angus because he's a bit isolated. He lives in Barra, you know, which is in the Outer Hebrides, and it takes him 4 hours to get to his own constituency office in Stornoway. So, you know, he is a bit cut off. So I suppose, therefore, from that perspective, he's trying to let the world know he's there.
I suppose a journey like that, he's got plenty of time to think, hasn't he?
Well, he's got... Yes, quite possibly. I mean, I get on all right with Angus, but I don't know where he's coming from on this one. I am intending, hopefully, if things go right, I've had a long planned summer holiday in which I hope to end up in Barra in the middle of August. So if I see him, I'll tap his knee. You okay?
I love it. Have you noticed as well, Ian, that there's quite a lot of those MPs up in Scotland and who have questioned the whole takeover. When you look at them, you see lots of links to Qatar. Obviously, you know that you know, I'm not saying that that's in any way wrong, but what I'm saying is that it gives the impression among Newcastle fans that they have an ulterior motive and they're working or they're speaking on behalf of. And that's the sad thing, I think, you know, when we're getting to that stage where we're looking at politics when we really want to be looking at football.
Well, absolutely. But as I say, I actually think that's Westminster bubble stuff. And unless the government change their stance, I actually think it's of really little importance apart from this ego massaging thing that I was talking about, because, you know, it's just airing stuff just to get your name in the paper from that perspective. And I really believe that's the context that it should be seen in.
Chris Dutton's asked a question here, which I'll ask to both of you. He says, how significant to the NUFC takeover do you think the Saudis banning BN is? Do you think that's a positive thing or a negative thing, Ian?
Well, the thing is, right, let's think about it, right? Here in Britain, we've got Sky and BT and Amazon now and BBC, all broadcasting, but they're all broadcasters in our national context, right? Would we want a situation where the Dutch or the Norwegians were broadcasting into our airspace, as it were? And it may well be that the Saudis have banned BN Sports because they want to negotiate their own television rights deal with the Premier League. What would be wrong with that? And, you know, I mean, you know, what we're talking about governments out in the Middle East, which looks like relatively hostile to each other, and therefore they're hostile not only to each other as governments, but also to each other's business interests. And, you know, if I was going to try and negotiate a television rights deal with, to get the rights to Premier League football, I would want to have as an independent state have the right to broadcast what I want in my own country, and that's exactly what we do. What we do here, and I know that people have got like satellites where they can get links from all over the world, but there's some questions about how valid and legal that is, and it's the Saudis looking after their own airspace from that perspective. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not a great lover of the Saudi Arabian regime, but I mean, I'm just trying to put myself into their mindset. That's why not?
It's what we said this week, Steve, isn't it? That it was nothing to worry about. In fact, it was something to celebrate. Yet some of the media articles were saying essentially that it was a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard from lots in the media, because in my point has always been that when the media start writing something about a particular topic related to the takeover, and they're writing in a negative stance, what they're hoping is that they've then given themselves some ammunition for later on that they can start hitting people over the head with, because there's an ulterior motive behind everything that these guys are doing at the moment. So coming out with something allows them, if things go wrong, to be able to turn around and say, "I told you so." And if things go right, you will never hear that topic talked about again. So it's all those red herrings, all those sort of the flack, the jip that they throw around,
I think going back to the Premier League and what they're engaged in or not engaged in, I'm wondering whether the supporters trust, the trust could actually write to the Premier League, because, not only, by the way, is this having a damaging effect on the club and on the reputation of the club, on actually with restraint to trade, but also our future transfer policy. Given everything else which is happening in the world, Newcastle fans who look at going to see the club as a sort of emotional outlet and release quite often, are now having a situation whereby the Premier League are actually inflicting more misery on them of a mental, an additional mental torture, as it were, in this time of when people have got enough on their plates, frankly. But, and then you're reading the papers and, oh, God, nothing's happening, it's stuck. And, and people are actually getting really angry and frustrated about it. And the Premier League, I'm afraid to say now, are culpable in that. It's kind of one of the longest prolonged cases of mass infliction of mental torture that I can think of, in a time when people are already stressed and strained because of the COVID-19 crisis. It's another thing that people can do without, frankly.
Yeah, great point, Ian. Welcome to Neil Mitchell. How are you, mate? You okay?
Aye, all right. Having a stressy day of the day, mate. Sorry about this.
No worries, mate. You're here, mate. That's all that matters. I'm going to take the next question for you. Steve Bennett asks, given that the season ends on the 26th of July and the transfer window opens on the 27th, and more worryingly, the Saudi government bodies and financial institutes take an extended Eid from the 26th of July to August the 5th, the Premier League are hurting unfairly one of their members by not making a clear-cut decision beforehand. We forgot about this extended Eid, didn't we? It's not something that I was aware of. And do you think that's going to affect it, Neil?
Well, I too would forgot that there's another Eid break coming up. And Saudi always take extended Eids compared to the rest of the Gulf. If Dubai have 3 days off, Saudi will be off for a week. It always seems to be the way. And the big guys that make the big decisions always take the holidays. So it has the potential to have an effect if everything's not done by then. That said, I think they have made it clear that this is a UK deal done on UK terms and UK times. So when everybody was getting concerned about Ramadan, getting concerned about do they make an announcement on a Friday or not, and things like that, I don't think that's always necessarily something that we should be worried about, because most of the work's being done in the UK. But if the financial decisions are being taken in Saudi, yes, that Eid, as Steve rightly points out, it could have an effect on our ability to do something and to make certain decisions. And that's another situation where this thing's been dragged on, and we're in limbo and everything's on hold. And I presume you have already covered that when you've been chatting with Ian already, and so it's just another example of how even the Premier League, when they've started chucking little bones out, saying, 2 to 4 weeks, then they're starting to put times and timelines on things. It's unfair. It's unfair on the fan base, and we touched it after the game through the week with Malcolm. This position that we are in is we have a club who has now been unfairly held by the Premier League, holding one of their members in limbo, and it's now having a knock-on effect all over the place. And it's not right. It's just simply not right now. The ownership and directors tests have been used by the Premier League to gain leverage over many different things. It's turned into something that it was never intended to be. More letters again. It's just ridiculous.
Talking of letters, Sheikh Gibbons asked a question for Ian here. He says, question for Ian Mearns. Are you as sick of the weekly SNP Liberal no-mark Qatari stooge letters to the Premier League trying to scupper the deal? And have you considered collaborating with fellow North East MPs to send a positive one for the area in contrast?
I take that and leave out the North East MPs who are Sunderland or Middlesbrough supporters.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
I must admit I haven't, and as I was saying before, Steve, I don't take much notice, and I would like to think that the Premier League wouldn't take any notice of that. I mean, if Oliver Dowden was saying it, I would have some significant concerns. But I mean, I really don't know where they're coming from. Look, everybody, every MP that I know, well, obviously one or two notable exceptions, are concerned about the human rights activities of Saudi Arabia. But frankly, most of the Middle East states aren't much better in many respects, So from that perspective, I think it's kind of crocodile tears and some significant hypocrisy. But also from the SNP perspective, let's not forget, by the way, anything that they can use to hit the current government with, and what they're trying to do is to compare and contrast the ownership of a football club with the decision to begin arms sales to Saudi Arabia for use in Yemen, which is, much more questionable than the ownership of a football club.
I think I've learned more about Saudi Arabia and what goes on with them and Qatar over the last 15 weeks than I ever would have done in my 5 years in senior school studying history. So it's been educational, if nothing else. Spenny Mag asks another question for you, Ian. He says, have any of the MPs or yourself been in contact, with the willing owners? Have they asked any questions about the area and how they could improve it? Has there been any contact with any of them? I mean, I presume you wouldn't be able to say, but
I can honestly put my hand up and say I've had no contact whatsoever. If they were to contact me, I'd be happy to talk to them at any time. But there has been no contact from them to me or anyone else that I'm aware of. But that's only that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Steve, I'm going to open this one up to you. Our good friend Henry Morris, not the one who rang the show last week, I presume, but the real Henry Morris, has reared his head again. There's I call it mischievous article in the Chronicle again, suggesting that Mike Ashley, who spent a lot of time in America, as we know, has been in touch with Henry Morris and is certainly willing to entertain a potential takeover should the combined takeover fall through. What's your take on that?
That Henry Morris, the Morris dancer. You know what? He's becoming. He's like a stooge, isn't he? His name just appears every few weeks. Whether or not somebody in Ashley's camp is using that name to just keep prodding and poking and keeping the story ticking on and keeping the angst going, because that's all it does. Every time his name appears, you get more and more angry. On another point, I mean, the chances are that, is Ashley sitting there looking at an alternative? Does he need to at the moment? Of course he doesn't. Everything's tied in, everything that he's set his stall with, all the contracts that he's signed, he's just waiting for the Premier League. So Henry Morris is just a distraction. It just keeps his name and his company in the frame, in the public eye. And that's about it. I see absolutely no point in even discussing Henry Morris and Clear TV.
I'm afraid to say that I'm how many fake overs have we had, with Newcastle United in the last sort of 6-7 years, and I'm afraid to say I think this is another fake over. Has Mike Ashley actually got the business scruples that he wouldn't consider for one moment putting aside an already done deal of 300 million if he thought he was going to get another 50 million on top of that at the drop of a hat. Mike Ashley hasn't got those sort of scruples. This is fake news from my perspective, and it's probably completely the invention of Mike Ashley's PR team just to keep the pot boiling. But I'm afraid to say, you know, I'd love to think that Mike Ashley had the business scruples where he would, you know, put to one side an additional 50 million, you know, if he thought that was going to happen very, very quickly. But that's nonsense, you know. It is. I mean, you know, the deeds are not signed. So why would Mike Ashley not be pursuing that automatically? You know, it's a gazump. If it's true, it's a gazump. So why wouldn't he be pursuing it? I'm afraid to say Mike Ashley's not that scrupulous, and he would have done so. It's nonsense from my perspective.
Neil, I'm sure you agree, because I do as well. I've called this fake news from the start, and it's got Keith Bishop's fingerprints all over it.
Well, look, we've covered some of this before, but let's retract it. We've been aware of the name Henry Morris, Steve and I, since when we checked it, actually since last October. It wasn't even as recent as January or February. It's a name that's been bounced around for ages. This has all the hallmarks of a stalking horse bid set up by Mr. Ashley. And again, Steve could give you, and I came across an example when we were helping somebody back in 2014. Suddenly another consortium appeared, and who was the head of the consortium? Oh, our friend Derek Lambias was the head of the consortium. Funny that's a strange one. You know, and so stalking horse bids are not unusual when it comes to dealing with Mike Ashley. In other businesses as well, we've come across examples of it too. So it really, you know, it doesn't surprise me. The next thing I'd be saying, one of the articles says he's preparing a charm offensive. A charm offensive for who? And why? Who's he wanting to charm?
Sorry, Neil. Who's going to have a charm offensive?
Henry Morris is preparing a charm offensive. And who's he charming? And why? He's not even in the running. And then they're saying he's going to appoint a PR firm. Well, hang on.
I mean, can I ask the question, Neil? Who wants a charm offensive from somebody you've never heard of?
Exactly. You know, but they're saying he's preparing a PR team. Well, hang on a minute. He's supposedly the head of a global media company. He should have a PR team of his own. He shouldn't need to be farming for a PR team. Now, I am aware of a PR team who's been asking questions for months. And a couple of the local journalists had questions sent to them by a PR team. And they assumed it was somebody working for Saudi, and it isn't. So there's something going on, but it stinks. Whether it's a stalking horse bid, whether it's somebody being put up with by Ashley, bearing in mind he spent a lot of time in the US. So if this guy's somebody who he's come across in circles in the US, he's a perfect mark to use in something like this. Or is this whole Maurice story something that's coming out of the backwaters of Doha again? We just don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, it ain't real.
No, it's definitely not. I think we all agree on that. Hadrian Will asks another question, something which I'm not too sure on. Ian, Steve, you might be aware. Other than Strawberry Place, what other land has Mike Ashley sold? And what are PCP going to get compared to when Mike Ashley bought the club? I mean, has he sold any more land? Was there anything else to sell? I know he set up a lot of companies, Ian. I mean, there's obviously the Strawberry Place has been much publicised, hasn't it? That was so.
Yeah. I'm not aware of anything else, Steve. I'm afraid that, you know, I sit in the Gallagher end and I read the papers like everybody else, but I haven't been doing any sort of investigation in terms of these land holdings or dealings. If I thought there was something strategic or important, I'm sure that would have been highlighted before now anyway.
Yeah, Steve, what about you? You've covered this a lot. I know you've always got your finger on the pulse with regards to these things. Has there been any other sales that PCP will have certainly found out during their investigations in the data room?
No, I don't think there was. I mean, Strawberry Place was always the key plot of land, if you like, that the club owned, that they purchased for the big casino. That was the plan of Hall and Shepherd. Other land that was dotted around was all owned privately by Sir John, for example, who was going to produce a training ground up by Ponteland. The only other land that I think was ever in question was the plot in front of the training ground at Darsley Park that now has houses on. But of course, the whole of that plot was owned by the Civil Service Pension Fund and the Civil Service Sports Club. Now, the club did take, under Shepherd in 2002, did take a 125-year lease on that bit of land. Whether it included the houses in the front, which there was a full football pitch and that was in front of Darsley Park on the actual Whitley Road side. I was a civil servant and we used to play football and it was used as a cricket pitch as well during the summer. It now has houses on and has for a while. I did look at the deeds actually and try to work my way back through, but all the way through there was no indication through the Civil Service Sports Club, other than some very strange names of people who now run the Civil Service Sports Club and that plot of land, and other plots on behalf of the Civil Service Sports Club, because basically they sold Darsley Park, and it was owned by individual civil servants like myself. We all paid £1. Well, we all paid money every month to use the facilities. But we all bought bricks. There was this buy a brick for £1 to build a new squash club and to build the extension that was originally there. And then it all got taken on by Newcastle United. And at the time, if I remember rightly, we used to share it with Newcastle. You could still go and use the squash courts because they weren't interested in them. Eventually, they demolished them. But that was the only other questionable piece of property that I saw as being a potential for movement. I did try and see whether or not the football club now owned the lease on that, of that 125 years and had bought the lease, and I couldn't get any further on that. So whether the club, and there's still 105 years left on the training ground lease, whether that ever got transferred in full to Newcastle United, I'm not too sure, and how that would impact on what you wanted to do with Darsley Park if you wanted to redevelop. Again, shouldn't be a problem under new ownership because the club had plans for extensions anyway. I'm not sure whether they actually own the property or the land as far down as the very bottom towards Hayden Grange, where the academy is either, because they are linked. You can't get to them. But there's a lot of building going on around that area at the moment. A lot of houses popping up. There's a lot of change of ownership going on, but it's nothing to do with Newcastle that I can see.
Ian, question from Jack Chater. He says, do you think it's just the piracy holding this up, or could it be something else, such as the structure of the takeover or assessing potential shadow directors, as intellectual property protection isn't actually part of the owners and directors test? I mean, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because Richard Masters has been doorstepped on various interviews, some political shows, some sports shows where journalists have tried to get the exclusive out of him, and he's been very careful and very coy, and people reading into his reactions. But is there any idea of what this could be about?
I wish I knew, Steve. I really do wish I knew. If this is going to be thrown out, and if it is thrown out, that's the Premier League's decision. But the very fact that it's taken so long for them to throw it out in itself is a disgrace because of the time lapse and the inertia that it's caused. But if it is thrown out, I've got a funny feeling that it'll be some technicality. Trying to think of a decent look. A big gangster. He has teams of people going around murdering people, and he's extorting money, running gambling rackets, and he gets done for tax evasion. And I think it'll be the equivalent of that.
Fair enough. Interesting answer. Neil, we've got about 5 minutes left of the first half. What's your take on why we're being delayed? I know we've covered it over the last few, the last few weeks in particular, but, there surely can't be anything else to look at.
As we've touched on, for me, it's very simple. This has moved from known as director's tests to a negotiation. And there's a three-way negotiation happening between Saudi Arabia, the Premier League, and Qatar. And for me, they're looking for a win-win-win solution. So everybody walks away from the table feeling like they've had a win and feeling like they've achieved something. So from the Premier League, it's knocking piracy on the head. For beIN, it's compensation. For Saudi Arabia, it's to get what they want. Saudi Arabia will never pay Qatar directly. That's not going to happen. But if they pay something to the Premier League and the Premier League then pay Qatar, that's not their problem. And so this is a negotiation. This isn't owners and directors tests. I think the owners and directors tests are done. And I think they've had an indication that if we can now, the Premier League have never had leverage over anybody to be seen to be sorting piracy out. They've just never had that leverage. This is the first time they've had the leverage. And as we've said before, Richard Masters has the potential to walk away looking like a hero. As somebody who was 6th or 7th choice for the job, he has the potential to come away with the Premier League and say, look, I did this for you. It looks good on his CV, doesn't it? But it's keeping us in absolute limbo. Even if they could, if the ONDs are done as I believe that they are, if there was a way that they can actually let that out and let everything else happen, but they can't do that because that'll create such a kickoff that this negotiation needs to be completed and done and solved. And I believe it will be. There's no doubt in my mind about it. But it's super frustrating. But it's way past owners and directors. It's even way past geopolitics now. This is genuinely a personal three-way negotiation, in my opinion.
Steve, the question from Spenny Mag is: do you think, like myself, the takeover will be announced after the last game of the season? Because because of the lockdown, because of the concerns that maybe his fans would flock up to St James's Park to bid Mike Ashley farewell. A lot of questions coming in similar to that as well. So Spenny Mag asks that: do you think the Liverpool game will be a key game, and that would be when it would be announced?
We're clutching at straws, trying to guess a date. We're trying to it's like pin the tail on a donkey, isn't it? Really, it's just becoming harder and harder, and you can understand the logic of it not being announced before the end of the season. You can understand the logic or the fear factor in it being announced while there's a potential for fans to gather. But fans would gather anyway, whether it was during the season, at the end of the season, the close season, next season, whenever it's going to be. And I think that, to be perfectly honest, the Premier League need to look at themselves and go, you know what, we're not as daft as that. It's beyond the worry of, oh well, fans might gather because they're trying to get me to go back to work, for God's sake, So there's an awful lot more going on, and I think as Neil has said and as Ian has said, this is far bigger than and more complex and more difficult as the days go on. But I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that
That's when Newcastle fans, man. When Newcastle fans, we keep seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and somebody keeps switching it off.
Yeah. We're used to that light. We're used to that tunnel.
It's been interesting to talk about the political side, Ian. Thanks for sticking around for the first half. Are you up for doing the second half and talking about some football, or are you busy?
If I can stay for about 20 minutes, Steve, is that all right?
Perfect. Right. Okay. What I'm going to do is we're going to bring the first half to a close. We'll have to set up another Zoom room because this is what you have to do in this COVID world, unfortunately, when you're not doing a live. So that's the end of the first half. We'll be back very soon with part 2.
Cheers.